But anybody who takes a view that Osama bin Laden was behind the revival or the assertion of Islam throughout the Middle East is deluding themselves if they think one person, Osama bin Laden, is the one person behind it. History has shown that organisations spontaneously bring about change in their own communities. Just have a look what's happened in Egypt. Have a look what's happened with the overthrow of Mubarak and his pro-US and pro-Israel stance in that area. Have a look at the destabilisation and the treatment of the Muslim Brotherhood over the last 50 years. If he thinks, that's David Irvine, or anyone else in the US or UK or Australia thinks that by the elimination of one person you can repress a movement, a mass movement, then I think, as I said, they are deluding themselves. And so what we will see happening now, in the wake of the Spring Revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and now in Syria, we are going to see some radical changes in the balance, I think, in Middle East politics. And so I go back to my original point. Until the conflict in Palestine is resolved by recognition of a Palestinian state, and that the attacks and the occupation of Palestinian lands are not ceased, then we're going to continue to have a problem, in my view. I say that coming from outside of the community, but I say that from my own assessment of those sorts of the sorts of events that have unfolded. If you've ever been to Canberra, you'll see the new building that's been constructed for ASIO. It's the largest building that's been constructed since the building of the new Parliament House. So they are going to have enormous resources. They will be employing, as David Irvine said, it's trebled in size since 9/11. So you can expect that you'll have much more contact with ASIO, I think, in the immediate future, whilst things in the Middle East particularly are as volatile as they appear to be at the moment. Once you give power to those sorts of organisations, those sorts of secretive organisations, as I said before, they are not going to relinquish that power. They are going to remain in control, and they use whatever techniques they think are necessary. Leaving aside the strict laws, they are going to use whatever techniques they think are necessary to maintain the status quo. In other words, whilst Australia has a partisan attitude towards Israel, that is, through Julie Gillard and her predecessors, they say that we go to that conflict with neutrality and with an even-handed approach. Well, that's simply not true, and every person who observes politics knows that the Australian government has a largely pro-Israel stance. So I can envisage that ASIO will continue to play an active role in trying to suppress people, firstly, who are pro-Palestinian in their actions and their words and deeds. And I can see that those people who are Palestinian or from the Middle East, Syrian, Lebanese, Jordanian or any of the other adjoining countries, once they agitate for justice and an even-handed approach in Palestine, then they're going to be the subject of considerable surveillance. So that's my little spiel about my assessment politically of why it is that we've got the laws that we have. The Israeli lobby is the most powerful lobby in the country. It's powerful politically, with people like Michael Danby in Parliament. It's powerful because of its allegiance to the United States, where the pro-Israel lobby is even more powerful. and it's powerful economically in terms of business. So they are going to continue to assert that Australia should continue to have a partisan approach in favour of Israel. Now, one thing that we've said in our negotiations and discussions with the people from the intelligence community and the Australian Federal Police and other organisations is that the $26 billion that has been spent on counter-terrorism, and you might ask for what purpose, if those intelligence and policing agencies had more engagement with the Islamic community to ensure that, firstly, when I talk about the Islamic community, obviously I'm talking about a very broad church of organisations, but to alienate, to ostracise, to isolate the Islamic community has been nothing short of disastrous. It was a curious thing when we acted for Nasser Ben Brika and the other brothers in the Pendennis trial. It was a curious thing that on the one hand the authorities were saying that we want to engage with the community, but on the other hand the treatment of those men, firstly, as you remember, by placing them in isolation, solitary confinement in very difficult circumstances that took a long time to change, then with 4 of the brothers being acquitted, no apology, no compensation, no nothing, to have them prosecuted in that way, in my view, whatever you want to say about Nasser Ben Brika, my view was a complete disaster. I don't know how deep the wounds are and how long they're going to take to heal, but from an outsider's perspective, I could only see damage being caused to the group that Nasser and the boys, the other men, belong to. I could only see further alienation occurring as a result of their treatment. So let me say something about some of the powers that ASIO have. And I'll talk about, I'm going to talk separately about, through some of the examples, about the way the Commonwealth criminal powers, counter-terrorism, can be so all-embracing. That the net has been cast very widely in counter-terrorism, and there are things that you might do that you might have no idea amounts to an act of terrorism against Australian law. But under the ASIO Act, that agency have enormous powers. Firstly, under the Act, there is a power to compulsorily request people to attend for the purposes of interrogation. A warrant can be issued by the Attorney General, and we saw that happen in the Ben Brika case, where people were compulsorily interrogated, and in that interrogation you have no right to silence, you have no right against self-incrimination, and you are not necessarily entitled to the lawyer of your choice. I'm not sure what they think of me at the moment. If you ever wanted to utilise my services, but they can vet what lawyer you have. They need to have substantial grounds for that, which might include alerting other people who might be the subject of an investigation, or the destruction of evidence that might be useful. So firstly, no, you have no right against self-incrimination, and you must answer questions, even if you've committed no wrongdoing, even if you are simply aware of certain things and do nothing, you must still go and answer questions. Here's an example. If it was said, for instance, that money was being sent back to Somalia to support for humanitarian purposes, to support an area that was controlled by Al-Shabaab, that would be a terrorism offence under current Australian law. You are not permitted to fund an organisation directly or indirectly, even for humanitarian purposes. The police or the ASIO would be entitled to have a warrant issued. They would be entitled to compulsorily or cause you to compulsorily answer questions about the funding arrangements that you were aware of, who was involved, where the money was to be directed to. They would be able to ask you whether you travelled to Somalia. They would be able to ask you who you stayed with, and you would not be able to, under the law, resist to answer any of those questions. If you did, you would be the subject of prosecution, and you could receive up to 5 years imprisonment if you refused to answer questions. You could also be prosecuted if you answered questions that were false. So that if you gave false or misleading answers, you could be prosecuted. You could be prosecuted if you told anyone that you were part of an ASIO interrogation. At the time in 2005, when some of the brothers in Nasser Benbrika's case were dragged off the street, they could not tell their family where they were. They could not tell their employer where they were, because if they did, they'd commit another offence punishable by 2 years imprisonment, and they were not permitted to say anything about the nature of the interrogation. So you would be taken to ASIO headquarters, you'd be interrogated. You could not tell anyone within your family, you could not tell your employer, and you would, as I said, face the risk of prosecution. Even if you've done nothing wrong, face the risk of prosecution. So it became very apparent to ASIO agents that this is a pretty unsuccessful way to try and deal with people, because it was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The best way to do it would be to do it informally. Someone from ASIO would approach you and say, look, I just want to have a cup of coffee and just talk to you. You've not done anything wrong. We're not intending to prosecute you. And we just want to have a general chat. Are we obliged to go along for a general chat? Well, you're not. Anything you say to any ASIO officer or Australian Federal Police officer will be recorded. You won't necessarily know you're being recorded, but it'll be recorded either by some taping mechanism, or the officers or the agents will take down notes of what's been said. So there is no such thing as an off-the-record chat. Absolutely no such thing. And we know that in the Jack Thomas case, that ASIO was working complicitly with the Federal Police. ASIO says to you and to the community, our charter is not about prosecution. We're not a prosecuting agency. We're only here to compile intelligence. That's all we're interested in. But let me tell you categorically, that is not true. They use whatever intelligence that they get to assist in the prosecution of alleged offenders and suspects. No off-the-record chats. You're not obliged to say or do anything on an informal basis. You're only obliged to answer questions if a warrant's been issued and you've been taken into ASIO headquarters for that purpose. That's the only time you're obliged to answer questions. But at all times you are permitted to ask for the assistance of a lawyer. And you can do that through legal aid, you could do that through the Darebin Community Legal Centre, or you could do that through a firm like ours. You can ask for advice from a lawyer. You can ask for a lawyer to be present. So long as your lawyer doesn't get